Hey everybody, Dennis Brown here with another Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Hopefully this week, my video and audio are working well. My fingers are crossed. For those of you that are catching this on replay, thank you for joining me. Hit me up in the comments with hashtag replay. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you, whether you're joining me live or on replay, it doesn't matter. I'm just happy that you're here. And I'm excited because today we have, it's a first time, I think, and that is, we're going to be interviewing a recent Freight Broker Bootcamp student, someone that took my course and then went on to start their business in this past February of 2021. And last month in August did over $1 million in sales in 1 month. Okay. So his name is Tim Cork. We're going to bring him up in a minute. But before we do that, okay, give me a shout out in the chat box here. Let me know the city and state you're logging in from. I would love to hear from you. I'll maybe be able to give you a quick shout out. Again, we've got Nelson Sanchez from Florida. We got James. We've got Muhammad from Cleveland. We got Tiffany from Berlin, New Jersey. Crystal from North Carolina. Eric Val from Santa Clarita, California. Miguel from Elizabeth, New Jersey. We have Tax Service from Arizona. We have Ray Phoenix from Atlanta, Georgia. Ray Phoenix from Atlanta, Georgia. That's kind of funny. We've got Rosie Yanez from Laredo, Texas. We got Eddie Reed from North Alabama. Crystal Hendricks. Why can't I hear or see anything? I'm not sure. Hopefully you guys can hear and see. Give me a heads up in the chat box if you can hear and see me. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to know. I'm hoping to God here that the streaming is working. We've been trying to troubleshoot the issues, but for whatever reason, I'm not sure where we're going to go today. So Andreas from Canada, Carlos from Herrera from Greensboro, North Carolina. We have Heather from Amarillo. We've got William Freight Logistics from Pompano Beach, Florida. Corey Abrams from Chicago. We got, Chicago. L. Brown from Chicago. Janali from Cape Coral, Florida. Joe Quinn from South Texas. Miriam, welcome. Rebecca from Idaho. Welcome, Rebecca. Alan from Austin, Texas. So Texas is in the house. We've got a lot of people. Amanda Rose from Abilene, Texas. More Texas. Corey Miller from St. George, Utah. Thank you so much for joining me. If I wasn't able to give you a shout out this week, I promise I'll try next week. Come back live. Just to give you a quick agenda. Number one, we're going to do the interview. This gentleman's name is Tim Cork. I'm going to introduce him in a second. Secondly, we are going to do live Q&A at the end. So for those of you that stick around to the end of this stream, you are going to be able to ask me questions, ask Tim questions, ask any questions you have about starting and growing a successful freight brokerage or freight agency, okay? So again, welcome. Thank you for the people that are just joining me today. We're going to do an interview with a recent student of Freight Broker Bootcamp that's going to talk about his journey from startup, which is a very short journey from startup in February when he moved his first loads to August last month here, August of 2021, when he did over $1 million in sales. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So without further ado, why don't I introduce my guest, Tim Cork. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really hope that the audio and video holds up here because I really want the audience to understand the dynamics of your story. So why don't we let you tell that introduction a little bit? Tell us a little bit of background on you, because you have an interesting background that's a little different than a lot of people that have taken my course.
Sure. So basically for the better part of the last 2 decades, I have been a buyer of freight services. So I was going out to freight brokers, and I was, and when I had product that needed to be shipped, I would go to freight brokers, get their quotes, and then I would book it with them. All the while I was doing this, I worked for other people, and I always knew I wanted to do something on my own. I think it's a personal flaw in myself that I can't work for anybody else. So, I learned that early on, and I decided, well, I need to do something for myself. And then one day, in looking for what can I do, I came across your Freight Broker Bootcamp course, looked into it, and it clicked. I could go out to my friends who are also buyers, and they could be my customers. And so that's what I did.
I love it. And you're based out of Rochester, New York, right?
Yes, sir.
So oddly enough, you took my course. I'm in Buffalo, so we're like an hour away from each other,
Yeah.
and so that's amazing. So you were buying logistics services from companies that were just like yours now, right? They were freight brokers, they were logistics providers.
Yes.
And so what you did is you just kind of switched seats a little bit and you started servicing and supporting people within your network. And then obviously now you're growing it outside of your immediate network. All right, great. So give us, this is what everybody's looking for, right? Of course, they want to know the hack. They want to know how you did it so quickly. They want to know how you went from zero pretty much in January of this past year or this year to over $1 million in sales in August. So, I know that's not something we can put. That's not one sound bite, right? That there's a process there. But first, tell them what you were able to do in sales from startup in February till now. Draw them a quick picture of that in regards to revenue or however you want to frame it.
Yeah. So I'm from startup moving the first loads in February till this week. I'm at right around 7.8 million in sales, total sales.
And just to give everybody a reference point, depending on when or where they're listening to this, it is now September 20th of 2021. So we're basically talking about 7 months, right? We're talking about 7 months, and he did 7.8 million.
Yes.
7.8 million gross, right?
Yeah.
And without getting into a whole lot of profit, I mean, his margins, I've validated his margins. They're really strong, right? They're very good. I mean, they're above 20%, okay, which is what you should strive for as a broker. But you'll be amazed how many times I hear from brokers and agents, well, you can't make 20%. You can't make 20%. You can only make 8 or 10%. And I've been telling people for years, that's not true. It might be true if you're in a really beaten down niche, or if you always focus on being the cheapest. But tell me a little bit about that. I mean, I'm sure you could have priced this out in such a way that you only made 8 or 10%, right, Tim?
Yes, yeah, definitely. What I should say is I immediately, well, not immediately, but very soon brought in experienced freight agents to help me. So I have 4 other people now that we're not big enough to have a real agent agreement, but we have a contractor agreement set up, and they had more experience in freight. And so we would talk about each one. And quite honestly, if I started out without their help, I definitely would have priced this a lot lower. I didn't understand the value of the service that the freight broker provides. These people pushed me. We went higher, and in the beginning, I only looked at the ones we lost. If we would come down a couple percentage, we would have made it, and we'd still make decent money. But they looked at the value of the product, and it really is knowing the value of what you're selling, and being confident in that, and then providing that value. Being there when things go wrong.
No, yeah. I agree. And the thing that you did, and you can share as much as you want to share around that. But one of the things about your story that really hit home with me is the fact that you niched it down. Now, you had been involved in this niche prior, right? You had past experience from the buyer side of the equation, but you really decided to pursue that thing. Number one, that you already knew. Number two, that you already had relationships in. And number three, that was a niche in kind of inside of a niche, right? So whatever you're open to sharing there, I don't want to, I don't want anybody to share anything they're uncomfortable with, because when you got a good niche, you kind of want to keep that a little bit of a secret. But tell us a little bit about your niching down process and why you think how that played a role in your success so far.
Yeah. So our niche is really padded wrapped or palletized shrink wrapped furniture. So that's really our niche. It requires more. Some customers require you to stage trailers. Well, as a broker, the whole thing about a broker, you don't have assets, that kind of thing. So I had to go to a trailer leasing company. I had to convince them that we were worth the risk, and I had to, for some customers, I had to lease trailers, and they would sit there. When the customer's ready, they would hook their power to it, fill it up, tell me that I'd have to get power only to move that. So that was one thing. There's also a big asset-based padded wrapped furniture carrier that, because of the COVID crisis, lucky for me, blessed, I guess, they chose not to do that anymore. They chose that's one of their services that they couldn't provide because drivers don't like it. Why don't drivers like it? Because it's a lot of waiting at both ends. Destination, most of the time within 2 hours, you hit the dock, you're loaded and you're gone. We sometimes have to have drivers sit 6 to 8 hours, but they're paid for it. And that's all in the rate counter at the beginning. We let them know. It was a niche that I was very comfortable with. It was a niche that I had customer contacts in, and it was a niche that not a lot of people like to play in because it's messy.
Yeah. And, in pre-interview here, we talked about how a lot of people come into the industry, at least from my perspective, having conversations with them as newbies, and they immediately go to that, one pick, one drop van load, right? Which is okay. You can make money there. It's a big market. There's a lot of dry freight, right? But the problem is that because it's easy, right? Because it's easy, that's where everybody gravitates. And when you have a lot of people gravitating to that, then you have a lot of competition. And then all of a sudden you have price compression and you got all these issues because it's easy. So you just said a really cool word, which was messy, right? His freight is messy, but guess what? He'd rather have messy freight because he's doing $1 million a month because of the demand, because most people fall away from that. They're not willing to get dirty. They're not willing to get messy. They're not willing to take those risks that are associated with messy freight. But Tim did, and he did a couple things. Number one, he leveraged his own knowledge, but then secondarily, he went out and got Freight Broker Bootcamp. He got some tools, which is just a tool, right? It's not a cure-all. It's not a, hey, get rich quick deal. And then he also leveraged talent. He hired some people to come in and help him fill the gaps of the things that he didn't know. The exact same way I did. I didn't know jack all about being a freight broker when I first started, but I hired some talent that came in and filled the gaps. I knew how to sell. I knew how fundamentals of what it took to grow a profitable business, but I didn't know how to cover loads. I didn't know how to rate. I didn't know how to do any of that. Did you know any of that when you first started? I mean, it was like, you thought it was like, from the outside, it kind of looks like, everything's just very streamlined and scientific. And I tell everybody, logistics it's all held together with baling twine and bubble gum.
Yeah.
Right behind the scenes. Everything is super dynamic. I mean, you cover a load, and then the next thing you know, an hour before that load's got to get picked up, the driver falls off and you got to recover it.
Yeah.
But that all happens without the shipper ever knowing. And that's part of the value. You solve those problems in real time. And so, yeah, no, I love what you just said there. I think that makes a ton of sense. And it falls very, very much back in line with my experience too. So, all right, awesome. So we talked a little bit about what you've been able to do. We talked about a little bit about your niche, which is padded and crated furniture.
Yeah.
Right.
So the crated is usually LTL, right?
Okay.
So that's kind of I guess would be a different niche. And there's a lot of and quite frankly, if my customers didn't want me to move the LTL, I probably wouldn't, because a good idea is number of shipments that I've done. I've done about just under 2,500 shipments in this time. 50% of those shipments were LTL. But that only represents 15% of my income. So, it was one of those things that if my customers didn't want me to do it, and I didn't, and I felt like, what, I need to service this customer, so you take, I don't want to say good with the bad, but I don't know, I can't think of any other word.
That's exactly how I frame it. There was lanes that I took from shippers that I didn't want to take, and we barely made any money on. But because that was either the first lane that I did with them in order to prove it and provide some value because they were struggling in that area, or it was something that I did as a tit for tat because I had all this other freight that was much easier to move and was high margin. And so I gave a little bit away. So it becomes, it's a give and take. I mean, you can't expect to just get the gravy, high profit, easy to move, no touch loads. I mean, it doesn't work that way. You've got to massage that a little bit. Shippers know they're hard lanes and they're hard to cover freight and they're easy to cover freight. Trust me, they know what flies off the boards and that people are dying for. And they know the stuff where they hear crickets every time they ask a question. Hey, you want this load from Regina, Saskatchewan down to Houston, Texas? It's like, no, please get away from me. I mean, I don't want anything to do with that. But at the same time, if you have a desirable lane, it obviously flies off the board. So, okay. So we've talked about quite a bit of things so far that have kind of been a part of your journey. But let me ask you this. If you could go back in this short period, this 7 months, because you're learning new lessons every day as an entrepreneur. I know I do, even at this point, 25 years later. What's one thing you would do different, right? If you could change just one thing, I mean, you've had an amazing results, but I'm sure there've been some things that you said, we really kind of screwed up on that, or we could have done better, or I wish I would have. What would be that one thing?
It's not even in the actual moving of the freight. It's in the back end systems, and specifically the accounting systems, the ARAP and the bookkeeping. I went with standard products that everybody knows that are out there. And of course I went with the basic version. And it didn't do a lot of what I thought it would do, and so, I would say a good 30, 45 days after moving loads, 100% of my day was fielding calls. Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money? And so I think, the whole money paying, getting paid and keeping the books, for tax purposes and that sort of thing, is probably the one thing I would have done different. And something I'm still working on today, something I'm still struggling with.
Yeah. As a broker, the financial management component is a really important one. And it's very much overlooked, particularly in the startup realm, because a lot of people don't have an accounting background. They don't have, they're not used to collecting, invoices and receivables. They're not used to cutting checks and doing all the invoicing, especially if you have complex freight. Sometimes that creates complexity inside of the invoicing because you've got to have special documentation and all this stuff, especially when you have, consistently have these drivers that are being held for 5 or 6 hours. You've got all this detention time and you have all this stuff that you've got to include in there, and people overlook that. So what did you do going from the conventional, accounting, invoicing stuff? How did you transition out of that to make that easier? Did you partner with another provider? Did you outsource it? Did you get a different software program? I mean, what did you do to overcome that? Or did you just streamline it and figure it out?
I just learned I learned more of what my software could do. I learned how to get the most out of it, how to optimize it. And so I understand it now. I understand where I went wrong. I still don't have the time to do it. So I'm going to have to. And everybody I talk to that's successful entrepreneur says, go ahead, get yourself a professional in that area. You will never regret it. I look at it like, I know I won't regret it, but I still don't want to take X amount of dollars every month to dedicate to this now, because that money could be used over here to generate more income. But what people tell me I'm not realizing is the income that this professional will save or guarantee comes in will well outpay for them in the long run.
Yeah. And I agree with what they're saying 100%. And your time is worth more than the cost of that financial management component. So if you just look at it from a purely selfish perspective and you say, the high value activities that I can be doing inside this business are worth X, and I can hire somebody to do these other things for a fraction of X, right? Way less. It's just a math equation at that point, right? And so I think that, you're in a unique situation. You've done 2,500 loads in a very short period of time. So accounting has become a real issue for you, right? If you don't stay on top of it, things are going to fall apart, right? I mean, everything's going to fall apart. If cash flow is not coming in from shippers, you're not going to be able to pay carriers and so on. And there's a ripple effect. Most people don't fall into that situation where they have to learn that lesson quite so quick, because they might move 5 or 10 loads their first month, and then they might move 10 or 15 loads and 20 loads. I mean, you went from zero to skyrocketing and very, very quickly. So you were a true trial by fire from an accounting perspective, and with a guy that doesn't necessarily have an accounting, financial management background. I'll tell you right now, I hate accounting. I hated it from day one. And I had, fortunately, from day one, I had somebody on my team that managed that from the very first. I never did an invoice. I never did. Well, I probably had to make some collection calls early on, but I never did an invoice. I never did any of that sort of billing stuff. Thank God, because I was terrible at it. And I'm still not good at it. I still have financial advisors and accountants to do all that stuff. I like making the money. I just don't like counting it and, doing all that, doing all the administrative stuff. So yeah, I think in the long term, you will do really well if you outsource that. All right, cool. So, yeah, I think is there anything else you want to share about kind of the startup and to help, whether it be something tactical to help with customer acquisition, or with partnering with carriers, or with niching down, or with anything that you want to share? And then we'll jump over into the Q&A.
Sure. I think, for me, I really thought that I went in with a great tool belt ready to go. I brought in some great professionals, but still it was at times daily. Now it's weekly. I hit a hurdle that just knocks me flat down, and you've got to have the tenacity to just figure out how do I get over this hurdle. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's a lot of phone calls and a lot of begging and a lot of, look, this is what I've done. Look, I just, but every time I get over one of those, it feels a little better. It gives me a little more confidence that, like, the next hurdle, I should be able to get over it. I still go to bed scared every night. I still wake up scared every morning. I still feel great during the night and great during the morning, but it's an up and down that I didn't. Especially being as busy as I am, I thought to myself, when I get to this amount of business, I'll be fine, but it's not. It's the same feelings of before I had my first load to now getting X amount of loads a day. I still have those same feelings.
Yeah, I love what you just said. And that was, every hurdle that you overcome, your confidence grows, and then it starts to compound. Now, of course, you got to keep that in check, right? Because ultimately your ego can get in your way. And I think we've all done that at different points in our life. I know I have. But the biggest hurdle most people have is moving that first load, right? Get that first load moved, and then one load turns into two loads turns into 4 loads and 8 loads, and it starts to compound. And the next thing you know, you've done $1 million in business. And who knows, maybe you'll be fortunate enough to start doing $1 million a month like Tim. But ultimately, I think that confidence is something and that you can't outsource. You have to learn those things and learn how to overcome them. And that's a huge confidence. I know it was for me. My past experience in business prior to opening my logistics business was a huge confidence boost. But when I started this business, I had to really go back down to the bottom, because I didn't know anything, right? The people that are watching this now know more about being a freight broker than I knew when I first got started. And so I do like that, one step at a time type approach, and just build on it, and just know that, if you start, the great thing is if you do it yourself, where you're actually doing the work yourself, it's easy to teach the next person, right? Yeah. And so I think that becomes a fundamental building block of the entire business. And then there was one thing else you said I wanted to comment on, and that was, you mentioned, actually it fell back into that same category. So listen, is there anything else you want to add, and then we'll jump into some Q&A?
Yeah, I just wanted to say my first 2 loads, I broke even on my first load. I lost $400 on my second load. Okay. And so.
And what's funny is a lot of people would have quit right there.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, they'll be like, oh, I can't lose $400. That's too much money. And I get it. You don't want to lose money. And in the normal course of events, you shouldn't lose money.
Right.
But shit happens. And you had a choice at that point. Dig in, figure it out, and support the customer the way you promised you would, or tuck tail and run, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people tuck tail and they run and they get scared.
It was a friend of mine. I gave him the first one. He gave me the first one. He spent $400 more than he thought he should on the first one as a friend. The second one, he said, I can't. I can go to this guy over here and pay $400 less. So I did it for $400 less. And then I educated him on why my prices were where they were. The next load I made money on because he went back to the guy I'd been using, and the guy he'd been using told him the same thing I did. Market conditions have changed. This lane now costs this much money.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And that's part of what you have to do to educate your shippers and your customers and everybody around you as to what's going on with market conditions, because it doesn't stay like this, right? Capacity of trucks and rates is very rarely are like this. Since 2003, when I first started, it's always like this. There's always the ebbs and flows. It's tight, it's loose. It's tight, it's loose. Fuel's up, fuel's down, right? Demand is up, demand is down. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And so the great part about that is that volatility is what creates opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay. That if it was stable and easy and it was just level playing field all the time, there would be way less opportunities for you as a broker to get your foot in the door. But that volatility creates those opportunities. I talk about that a lot. So, all right, well, listen, Tim, I want to thank you so much. For those of you that are curious about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Again, I've had that course for over a decade. We offer a 60-day, 100% money back guarantee. If you're not happy for any reason, just send us an email. We'll refund you with no questions asked. Tim, thank you so much for being here. Congrats on all your success.
Thank you.
It's an amazing story. I can't wait to get you back on here in another year or so and see how far things have went.
Thank you.
Again, if you guys are curious about getting started, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. All right, so let's migrate into some Q&A. I'm going to grab a quick drink. For those of you that have questions, all right, you can start typing the questions into the chat box. Now, I highly doubt we're going to get to all the questions today. Tim has a business to run. I have a meeting at 1:30, which means I got to get out of here a little after 1. So we won't get to all the questions. We'll get to as many as we can. If we don't get to your questions today, we'll try to come back in the chat box in the next week or a period of time, maybe try to reply to them, private message you, or put it in the thread. But ultimately, we will try to get to you. So type your questions in the chat box and we will try to get a response. And if you specifically want Tim to answer the question or you're looking for my response on it, just let us know. Or we'll both maybe respond depending upon the type of question it is. All right. I'm not sure if that's a question. I knew that I have 2 cousins who are owner operators. Yeah, that's not a question. All right. So here you go. Here's a very typical question from Daniel. How do you determine rates for a lane? Is there an equation? There is no perfect math equation for A plus B equals C when it comes to rating. There are frameworks that you can use to understand what the spot market of a truck is going for today. Okay. And depend upon the volatility in the market, it might not go for that tomorrow or next week. So that's something as a freight broker, you're going to have to get in tune with. I'd like to hear what Tim has learned about rating. Obviously he's learned some things because he's been able to hit the mark quite often in his rating, but talk to us a little bit about how you rate when if it was a new prospect or even an existing customer, a new lane. Talk to us a little bit about how your rating process.
So DAT, I use the load board DAT. They have some rating tools that I use as a baseline. But usually if I have a lane and I know I'm going to have a lane, I'll just post it. And then, within seconds, I mean, it's amazing. Within seconds of posting a load, the phone rings off the hook. And I have an idea what I want to pay. So I tell them, and then, owner operators are really good. They're going to let you know, I said, well, I pay $2,500. Nah, I'll do it for $32. I mean, it's, so, and then you get to know, lanes. The more business you do, lanes that are hard to cover. Like now, there's no trucks in Southern California. So I send everybody from Arizona to Southern California. That immediately adds a couple grand to any load right there. But you don't know that, and how I got burnt on a load when I realized, that's how I learned. Okay, there's no trucks in Southern California. But there is tools out there to give you guidelines, but in the end, it is just knowing what the owner operators are currently asking for.
Yeah. And so what I've said before, the rating tools on DAT and TruckStop and all the load boards and whatever independent rating tools are out there, those are valuable tools, but they are not the sole tool that you are going to use as a broker to rate your freight. They are going to give you one dimension of the information that you need. Okay. So let's say you're looking at the picture from this angle. Okay. So that's the dimension you're going to get. You're getting that straight on forward facing dimension. But what you also have to look at is you have to look at it from this angle. And this angle is when you're actually talking to carriers and drivers, and you're talking to the people that are on the road, that are actually moving the freight and understand the costs that are going on daily and the dynamics of the market. And so what Tim said was you can post loads and people will call you. That's another great way to get intelligence. What I call that is market intelligence, rating intelligence. It's coming to you. If it's a desirable lane, people will call you. And then the other thing you can do is you can use, inside the rating tools or the load boards, a lot of times they'll have what's kind of like a lane history or a lane makers, right? Lane makers. I think that's the old DAT term. And where you can put a lane in from Buffalo to Atlanta for a flatbed, and you'll be able to see all the carriers that have posted their trucks in that lane over the last 30, 60, 90 days. And it'll give you the carrier's name, how many times they posted their truck, and it'll give you a phone number. Guess what? If you have a lane from Buffalo to Atlanta for flatbeds and you see a carrier in the last 30 days or 60 days has posted their truck 15, 20, 30 times, there's a really good chance that they're going to have a truck in the Buffalo area looking to get back to Atlanta. Right. So it's 1 + 1 = 2. You contact that carrier. You say, hey, listen, I've got some dedicated freight coming out of Buffalo to Atlanta. I saw you've been posting your truck. It's whatever, we're moving abrasive grain in super sacks, whatever your product is. And, we have these loads coming out a couple times a week. Do you have any trucks up here now? You start that dialogue and then you get into the rating. What are you guys looking for? What are you looking for to get back down to Atlanta? Well, we would need 1,500. Well, most we can do is 1,250 or whatever the rate is. I'm throwing rates out there. That's how you start that dialogue. That becomes a little bit of a negotiation, but then you develop that relationship and you develop that intelligence. Now, that's the going rate for that lane. And so, one load does not make, you an expert or give you the capacity to move unlimited amounts of freight, but it's a starting point. It's where you got to start. Right. So, yeah, I think the 3 things you should do is use the rating tools, use lane makers and different history based on lanes. And then the third thing is post trucks, talk directly to drivers, talk directly to their dispatchers and carriers that are moving and want to move those lanes, just like Tim said with owner operators. So good question. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Daniel. All right. So best way to contact customers. All right. So Jay, this is a little bit broad. So I'm not sure this is your real question, but Tim, how did you do outreach to your customers? How does most of your outreach take place? Do you do it through email? Do you do it through phone? Do you do it through face-to-face? I mean, how do you do most of your outreach?
Most of it's phone. And then second, I've started LinkedIn, and I search for specific positions in LinkedIn and go that way. But most of it is phone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would tell you that over $200 million I've done as a freight broker, my business as in the freight brokerage industry. And I would tell you that 90+% of that, we never met the people face to face. It was all done over the phone, email, internet. That's good and bad, but it just is what it is, right? That's the nature of the industry. I'm a big believer now that if you can get face-to-face with prospects and you can get face-to-face with your customers, it will pay you huge dividends, but it's expensive and time consuming and difficult because, not only the cost, but obviously the conditions we're dealing with now with, post, pre, next, whatever we're doing from a pandemic perspective. But ultimately, I think if you can get FaceTime, it works really well. Another thing that I think might work well, if you're good face-to-face and you're comfortable with it, is doing things like Zoom calls. It gives you the phone, but gives you that face-to-face feel, which definitely is different than just the voice on the phone, right? Just the other end of the phone. So that may work well. I'm a big believer in LinkedIn. Tim, you know that. Obviously, everybody that's followed me knows that I used LinkedIn. It was a primary source for us for generating new clients. And so I think that the phone, email, LinkedIn, and face-to-face are the key, but the phone is going to really what's going to drive your business as a broker. So hope that helps, Jay. I've started as a broker agent. Please tips. Tim, are you clicking your pen?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I just kept on hearing it. And I was like, I didn't know if it was because I have that same habit. I actually have poker chips that I rifle, and it drives my wife crazy, but it's funny. She comes in, she'll be like, please stop with the poker chips. But anyway, that's a whole
my kids are always telling me I'm shaking the house. My foot's usually always going. They'll come upstairs, Dad, you're shaking the house. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, hey. All right. I've started as a broker agent. Please tips for starters. Well, Tim's not an agent, but I think he shared some tips, right? I think this whole interview has been about some tips for startups. If you want specific tips for agents, okay, I think I'll give you a couple of tips. One, you got to niche down. Okay. You want to, don't be jack of all trades, master of none. And just because you start in one niche doesn't mean you're limited to that niche throughout your career. You can expand into other niches as your expertise and skills and network and abilities grow. So start with a niche down, very much like Tim did. I love the way he niched down. Okay. The second thing I would say is invest in some sales training. If you don't come from a sales background, you have to invest in selling. I don't care if it's my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program or my No Cold Calling for Freight Brokers LinkedIn and Social Selling program, or whether you read books by Jeffrey Gitomer and all the classic salespeople or sales trainers. All of those are great, but you have to invest in some training and some skills in and around sales because it doesn't come inherently to everybody. What might shock you guys is that when I first started in sales, you may have heard this story, I was admittedly the worst salesperson they had ever hired in the history of their company. And I knew it. I was terrible. I was and still am very introverted. You may find that hard to believe because I'm sitting here on video, but I'm introverted. I'm never the life of the party. I don't strive to be in big venues with thousands of people. I don't get energy from that. I get energy from going out in the woods and doing outdoor stuff by myself or watching a movie by myself. I'm very introverted, right? And so, I was a terrible salesperson, but what I did was I invested in myself and learning those skills. And I think that would be probably one of the biggest investments, the best investments you could make is learning the fundamentals of how to sell. And then I think, you just, and I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here. And that is that a lot of people that start in this business, and I'm not saying this about you, Monica, but I'm saying a lot of people that start in this business don't really understand. They're doing it for money. They're saying, I want to make a lot of money. And that's very possible. You've seen today, Tim and his family are doing really well right now. I have a feeling financially compared to maybe at different times throughout his career. But money is shallow and is only going to go so far. And so it's really not about the money. You need to get really clear on why you're doing this. For me, I'll just tell you my personal, I got married on September 27th, 2003. I opened my business on October 3rd, 2003, 6 days after I got married. I didn't have enough money to take my wife on a honeymoon after we got married. That's how broke I was. And I knew that my wife wanted to have kids. We wanted to have kids. I wasn't quite as crazy about it as her, but I wanted to have kids, but she was really wanted to have kids. And that was my driving force, not disappointing her, not letting her down, being able to provide the things she wanted. I wanted her to be proud of me. I wanted my kids to have things. So it really comes down to those types of things. And then when my first child was born, in 2006, I think is when, 2006, then it became crystal clear what I was doing and why I was doing it, because every day I woke up, that's the only thing that's what drove me. That's what just made me do the things that I did and break through those barriers and do things that I never thought I could do. So you got to get really clear on that. And I think that will really help you. So there's a couple tactical things, and then maybe something that's a little bit more part of your mindset, your mental part of your game, which I think is an important part of this. I think you have to manage that. So those are a couple tips on my part. Is there anything you want to add to that, Tim? I mean, anything that resonates with you?
Exactly what you said. You need to find out your why, and I struggled at other ventures before this because it wasn't. I thought I just wanted to work for myself. Well, I want to work for myself. Maybe I can't work for someone else. I'm not sure what it is, but it also wanted to be in something that was making a difference. And part of my niche is making a difference for certain individuals. So
yeah, without getting into detail, I know the reason why. But if you understood the behind the scenes, what Tim's doing has a huge impact on people, right? On people, it's not just dollars and cents. So there's a connection there. So I urge you to find that connection wherever you can. And if you can find it in your niche, great. But ultimately find out your why and invest in sales. And I think that will help a lot, right? And get mentors that have already done what you're looking to do. It always helps you fold time. It's not a cure-all, but it will help you fold time. Okay. All right, Monica, hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Look for lane customers. I don't know about that question. All right. Well, we'll answer this question, but I don't know if either of us are qualified to. Enrique, do you recommend just broker authority or register as a carrier to work with that DOT and apply for broker authority? I'll give you my personal standpoint on it. A lot of new brokers to the industry try to hack the system by getting their carrier authority and getting one truck and doing something there. And it's not what you think it is. I never owned trucks. We never owned trucks. Did over $200 million as a broker. Tim doesn't own trucks. He's done $7.8 million in 7 months. Okay. So trucks are not required in order to be a successful broker. Not your own trucks, not your own assets. That's the thing of a broker, is that you are brokering, right? You have a partnership with carriers. You have a partnership with shippers. You're managing the middle, you're managing the freight, but it doesn't require assets. Now, if you are a carrier already and you have a fleet of trucks, I'm not telling you to dump the trucks. Start a brokerage, have another division, because now you can kind of cream the freight, right? You can take all the high margin stuff then the desirable stuff that you want to put on your own trucks that works out really well for you from a planning perspective, right? And from a financial perspective, and then you can broker out the rest. But don't forego all that opportunity that you could be moving freight on other people's trucks just because you're an asset-based carrier. I think every asset-based carrier, has opportunities if they want to be a broker. Now, it's not for everybody, and that's okay. Just be a carrier. We need carriers too. We need shippers, we need carriers, we need brokers, right? But it doesn't require you to be a broker and a carrier to be successful. You saw that today. And, many of the story, matter of fact, I think all the success stories that I've had, there maybe one was also a small carrier. I think one of them was a small carrier with a small fleet, but almost all the success stories that I've highlighted on Freight Broker Bootcamp Live have all been straight brokers or just agents with no trucks. So, Tim, what are your thoughts?
Coming from someone who was in asset-based for many years, I don't get an asset just if you if you think it's a better way to become a broker. I'm not sure if that's really what's being asked here or not, but I mean, even one truck, the cost and the hassle and the regulation is unbelievable. So if that's what this is asking, just get your broker authority. Don't.
Yeah. And I think I had somebody message me the other day through Facebook and tell me that they were doing well in brokering, but they wanted to get their own truck. And I told them, they asked my advice. And I said, my advice is, if you're doing well in brokering, stick with what's working. If you don't have a lot of experience in growing an asset-based trucking company, it is way different and way harder than brokering. I promise you, there's a lot more risk. and it's a lot harder to eke out a margin. I don't care what the supply and demand is, right? It's more expensive to get drivers now than ever. Driver retention is horrible. There's all kinds of unforeseen costs that you're not thinking about. You're just thinking about, hey, if I go buy a used, power unit with a van trailer, I can get that for 40 or 50 grand, and I can pay that off in a year or two. But you're not thinking about all the things behind the scenes, including repairs and maintenance and compliance with DOT and sourcing drivers and all of the headaches that go with assets. Trust me, trucking companies earn every dollar that they make because it is a huge pain in the ass to try to make money as an asset-based carrier. That's just the only way I can say it.
I worked for a carrier. We had 150 power units, 300 trailers. We had 4 full-time people. All they did was driver retention, driver recruitment. Every day you'd lose 15 drivers, you'd put on 10. You'd lose 12 drivers, you'd put on 13. It's hard.
Yeah, very difficult to eke it out as a carrier. Now, and so for those of you that are on here that are carriers, whether you're an owner operator, you got a small fleet, or you're part of a big fleet, kudos to you if you guys are doing well, because that is not easy. Okay. Anybody who owns a carrier business or runs a carrier business a ton of credit, because it's not an easy space to be in. And you should show that type of respect as a broker when you're dealing with a carrier, because it's a tough way to make a living.
Yeah.
But they're willing to do it. And it's something that many people do it because they're passionate about it and they love the business. It's not just a place where they're making money. So, all right. Next question. All right. So here's a question for you, Tim. How you mentioned that you have some agents working for you. Lou Corey Willis asks, how did you vet your agents?
Well, like I said, I was a buyer. So these are people that I used to work with as a buyer, and they did a good job for me. So I figured they'd do, a good or a great job with me.
So he had worked with them and bought transportation services from them in the past. So he had a previous relationship. So that's how he vetted them. He vetted them by having long-term previous relationships with them. Now, you as a new broker, or somebody else as a new broker that's looking to hire agents, you may have a network of people that you trust that are already in the industry. Maybe they're already in that role. Relationships are probably, long-term relationships are the easiest way to vet somebody, because over time, everybody shows their true colors, right? If they're not good at what they do, then it shows in their results. If they're honest, it shows in how they act. If they're dishonest, it shows also equally as well, right? So for me, vetting agents, because we had a lot of agents, we grew, the first few years we had no agents, we had all employees. And then we went to the agent business model, rolled that out. And by the time I think I sold the business, I think we had about 70 offices throughout the US. But agents, you definitely need to vet agents. A couple of things we did. Obviously, on the way in, we filled out ask questionnaires to try to vet out information there. Secondly, we obviously did phone interviews where we talked to them extensively to see that their values and everything that they believe in and how they run their business was in line with our business. Thirdly, we did criminal background checks on all of our agents. We didn't do that at the beginning. We learned the hard way that you want to do criminal background checks on your agents. You may also want to do credit checks. And I'm saying credit, even though some people are going to say, well, what does that have to do with anything? They don't have to pay the bills. Here's what I'm going to tell you. People with good credit have a tendency to honor their obligations more than people with bad credit. Now, there are people that are very honest and are just in a bad situation that have bad credit. But it does show something. Statistically speaking, if you look at people that have high credit scores, it means that over an extended period of time, they've whatever payments they've agreed to make, they've made on time, which is not always easy, even when things are tight. So you may want to run credit check. You may want to run a criminal background check. You definitely are going to want to talk to some references, but those references should be not just friends and family. They should be a past employer, someone that they worked with in the past, right? So try to do that. So those are a few things you can do to vet your people. We use LinkedIn extensively. So that helped us with the vetting process because we could see their employer profile. We knew where they worked beforehand. We knew who they were connected with. We knew what groups they belonged to. We saw the things that they were posting on LinkedIn. We saw the comments they were making. Social media is a great way to vet people, right? If you go on their social media and you see that they're the drama, they're always in the middle of drama and controversy, and they like to be that person who's in the middle of that, you may want to add that to your vetting process, because you probably don't want to deal with someone who's heavily into drama, because if that's their pastime, if that's one of the things they like to do, then they're probably going to bring drama to you, which you probably don't want. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. Those are just a few ways to consider, right? Vetting whenever, and I don't care whether that's an agent or a hire inside your company, or if it's a W-2 hire or an independent contractor, or whatever, you definitely want to vet it. You're not just looking for anybody that can fog a mirror. Okay. You do need to vet them.
And definitely have really quick outs for you in it. Like really specific, like you need to quote your first load in 2 weeks. You need to book your first load in a month. You need to, and all these things like this. If you don't meet these at any time, our contract's null and void, and we'll separate business, as friends kind of thing. Because a lot of time and money can be wasted on someone that's just not going to be able to do it.
Yeah. Setting expectations up front, expectations of what they can expect from you, and getting some expectations of what you can expect from them. So I think having that conversation is very healthy in a new relationship. Okay. All right. Good question. Thanks, Lou. Corey Willis. All right. So how did you determine your niche? He already talked about how he determined his niche. He was a buyer of transportation in and around this niche previous to this. So he had experience there. Okay. And myself, what I did, having no experience in any freight or logistics niches, is I surveyed the market. I looked at the entire market. I was located in Buffalo, New York. I still am now in this Buffalo area. And one of the things that we were looking at is Northeast outbound freight. And the dynamic that attracted us to that niche, we started with van freight. And the dynamic that attracted us to that niche was the disproportionate truck to load ratio. In the Northeast, there was always more trucks than there was loads. Okay. Northeast outbound. So if you're posting a load from Boston to Chicago, the phone will blow up, right? You'll literally get 30 phone calls in 3 minutes, right? Not all lanes are like that. So we knew that if we could get the shippers, we would always have equipment that we could cover the loads with, as long as our rates were in line. So right, wrong, or indifferent on the thought process, that's how we initially started with that niche. We did Northeast outbound van freight. But what that meant, and what made that hard, was that when one of my salespeople would come to me and say, "Hey, Dennis, I've got loads going from Atlanta to Chicago, and they really need trucks and they want to work with us," I would have to tell them no. And that is very hard. And the reason why I did that wasn't because I didn't want the money. It wasn't because I didn't want the customer. It's because I wanted to focus and develop that niche. And that niche to me was important, because I knew that if we could create a carrier database and a rating database that was reliable and consistent in and around that niche, Northeast outbound van freight, that we could start to dominate that market. We could really grow quick because of our expertise in that specific market. Because moving a load from Boston to Chicago is not the same as moving a load from Atlanta to Chicago. It's different. It's a different market. It's different pricing. It's different carriers. It's different challenges. It's different. So that was part of how we did it. And then once we started developing our expertise in van freight, we realized that those customers had refrigerated loads that they wanted to move, because some of them moved vans and reefers. So guess what we did? We moved into refrigerated. So then we started doing reefers. And then we had customers that wanted to do business in that niche that had flatbeds. And then we expanded that way. And then we started moving out of the Northeast. We started moving into other geographies. We started moving into other niches. We started doing Department of Defense freight, where we started working with them. There was a lot of things we did over time. Now you got to be in business a few years in order to start doing business with the Department of Defense, but ultimately that's a niche that you can pursue. We did. I mean, it was something that we worked on and did a lot of business with. So ultimately, that's how I developed my niches. Tim talked about how he did his. He was a buyer, had past experience. Is there anything you want to add to that, Tim?
No, I mean, that's, my wife and I joke about niches in the riches, or riches in the niches all the time, like you say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's in anything you do, though, narrow it down and be the best at it.
Yeah.
and I
And
think that's
expand from there and expand from there. So you can niche down by industry. You can niche down by equipment type. You can niche down by geography, or you can create a hybrid of any of those. That's what I tell people when come down to the overall framework for developing your niche. Okay. Good question. Thank you. Marvin, are all the shipments under contract? How did you grow so fast? What was your strategy? Well, I'll let you answer that one. I know you answered some of this, but Marvin has a specific question. Are all your shipments under contract? I think there was a typo. And then how did you grow so fast? What was your strategy? I think I heard it during the interview, but let's reiterate it.
Yeah, no, they're not under contract. I mean, everyone is a spot rate, and it goes out to numerous brokers. So how did I grow so fast? Very blessed. Other people that perform this niche went away because of COVID this year, so that provided less competition. And what was my strategy for what? I'm not sure, but basically I mean, a overall big strategy: service every load like it's the best load we're ever going to get, and like it's the most important customer we're ever going to get, and admit when we screw up, and do our best to recover when things go wrong.
Yeah, I think another thing is he used his existing relationships, and even even beyond the existing relationships, he focused on relationship. He didn't focus on price. He focused on value, right? He didn't just try to be the cheapest. The challenge with being the cheapest is it's easy. It's easy to quote cheap freight. It's hard to deliver at any sort of level of service. You're going to fall off a lot of loads. You're going to have a lot of issues. You're going to have all kinds of problems when you want to be the cheapest. When you want to, it's easier to sell more expensive than it is to service the cheapest. Okay. So you need to learn that process. And so he learned he had mentioned another thing he did was he surrounded himself with people that had more experience in certain areas that he did, right? He didn't understand the rating component. He thought he had to be the cheapest, but people on his team that he worked with educated him that you don't need to. There's value to this service. We're in a niche. You need to charge for it. He talked about that through the interview. So I would caution you all on trying to be the cheapest. Go back and listen to what Tim said during the interview about digging in and focusing and understanding the value that you're providing the market. And all that information is available. You can see the load to truck ratio. You can see the rates are going up or going down. You can have conversations with carriers and knowing what those rates are. I don't care how much you want to be the cheapest. You want to quote something at $3,000 for the load because that's what, the shipper is telling you. But all of your market intelligence is telling you that you're not going to be able to move it for less than 3,500. You quoting at 3,000 is doing nothing for him or for you. You need to educate your shippers, and you need to be able to stand up and say, listen, with all due respect, I totally would love to move this at $3,000 if we could do it, but this is not going to happen. So we can sit here and hope, or we can take what's really readily available today that I can tell you and guarantee you that if you pay me $3,500, this load will pick up tomorrow, deliver the following day on time in good condition. That's my promise to you, but I can't promise anything at $3,000. And the problem with most people is they have a hard time saying that. They have a hard time having that conversation. So you need to do that process, and you need to do it respectfully. I mean, again, these are prospects, or maybe they're customers of yours, but customers will respond to people that stand up for the value of what they represent. They don't want to be they don't want to be gouged, but they don't mind paying a little bit more if the person's going to actually stand by what they're talking about and is willing to deliver. So yeah, I think that should shed a little bit of light, Marvin. Hopefully that helps. Good question. All right, one or two more questions, and we're going to wrap it up for today. When you first started, you don't have any references. Do you tell the shipper you are brand new? Okay, go ahead. Tim, what do you think? When you first started, you don't have any references. You don't have any customer testimonials. You don't have any carriers that you're not doing business. Do you tell your shippers you're brand new?
Well, personally, yes. And for me, it was more of an issue.
They knew anyway. They knew
anyway. Yeah, my customers knew. But for me, it was more of an issue with carriers, because carriers, they're going to do a job, and then how do they guarantee getting paid? So we had to we certainly had to be creative in our payment terms with a lot of carriers.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you ended up working with some factoring companies that factored some of your invoices. You had taken out some personal credit lines to help finance some of it. You co-brokered and started helping doing some of the financing of it. So I mean, here's the thing, from a carrier perspective, I think you're spot on, Tim. I think you're gonna have to prove yourself with some of these carriers and factoring companies, and that's just the nature of any business. You got to build that credit up, one load, and so on and so forth. And we had Elio Longoria on as a live. He interviewed him a couple times now, and he talked about how he was able to build credit very quickly on the load boards and go from having no rating to having like a B credit rating, and working with different factoring companies, and that entire episode. So I think if you go on YouTube, you can find a video about building your credit fast on my channel as a broker, and Elio walks through his process that I think would help you there. From a shipper's perspective, I'm never going to lead with the fact that I'm brand new, right? That doesn't build confidence, but I'm also not going to lie. Okay. So if they really want to do the due diligence, they're going to find out how old your MC number is, and they're going to know anyway. Okay. So if they do ask that question, you can say yes, but, and then you can explain why you're doing it, because that will help. And number two, you can explain what you've done to prepare and to ensure that you're going to be able to support and service them the way that they need to. Right. And so it's not, and then you just sit there and wait for them to click the phone on you. That's where the sales process comes in, right? You have to position yourself differently. You have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit. And so I wouldn't lead with, hey, we're a brand new broker and we want to move your freight, because that doesn't bode confidence, but I definitely wouldn't lie about it either.
And have faith and trust in your story, whatever that is. Are you new? Yes, but, and then here's my story. Have faith and trust in that. You're talented, I'm sure. So.
Yeah. And Tim used his story. We'll use his story even today. Listen, I've been in your shoes, Ebony. I know you're a buyer of transportation. I know the challenges with vetting new providers. I know what it takes to do your job. And I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but when I was in your shoes, here's exactly what I looked for. So when I built this company and I set this company up, this is why I set it up that way. Does that make sense? Do you see how he can use his story from being on that side, and it builds that rapport and that credibility? Now that's an easy one, because obviously he was in their shoes, but that's a perfect example of how you use your story and how you use your background to overcome, the newness. And it's more of an issue for you than it is for them. I promise you. Yeah. It's more of an issue in your head than it is in theirs. All right. Last question, guys. Let me just try to find a good one. I'll answer this really quick, then we'll do one more. James, if you enroll in the course, go through the training, and then if you want to be an agent, I just launched a brand new resource as a Freight Broker Bootcamp. It's freightbrokerbootcamp.com/jobs. It's a free job board where students, any broker from my community or beyond, can post jobs. And most of the jobs are agent related. They're freight broker and freight agent related. They post jobs there. You can go in and you can develop relationships with the people that are posting jobs there. And there's a very high probability you'll be able to get hired if you went through my course, and then you're able to present yourself in a professional manner during some sort of an interview, right? Because they are looking for people. I promise you. We get we're getting new job posts every day. We've got new applications going through every day. I've heard people starting to get hired through the process. It's absolutely free for employers, and it's absolutely free for you. So that's one of the resources I put in place recently as a part of the community, because I wanted brokers and people that want to be agents to be able to connect. And I didn't have a mechanism for doing it. So you can check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com/jobs. Anybody who wants to be an agent or hire agents, check it out. It's free. Okay, here you go. David asked, Dennis, question, how often should one contact a customer after the initial contact? Have a customer who said he needed help moving freight, but hasn't given me a list of what they need to move yet. Okay, so number one, until they start doing business with you, they're not a customer, they're a prospect. Okay, let's clarify that. I just, from a language perspective, customer to me is someone that's doing business with you and is paying you for your services. Prospect is someone that you want to do business with you. They're pre-buy. Okay, so if you're reaching out to, if you're having conversations with you had a conversation with a prospect, they said they're interested, but you haven't heard back from them. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Okay, you are going to have to follow up with them. If you, no matter what they say on the phone, if at the end of that conversation, it's, oh yeah, I'll email you or reach out to me next week, or I'll call you next week, and you don't hear from them, you need to be following up. And so some people feel uncomfortable and they feel a little over aggressive with following up. I'm going to tell you, my theory has always been this. You're going to lose less customers by being a little over aggressive than you will lose by not following up. You have to follow up. And so whether that follows by phone or by email or by social or by all three, that's what you need to do. You need to continue that dialogue. Now, here's the secret that nobody tells you about sales. And it's all about momentum. Okay? Sales is all about building momentum. So let me draw you a picture mentally here. Most of you understand American football. So you have one team on one end of the field, another team on the other end of the field, and the one team kicks off and the other team fields the ball at about the 20-yard line, and they run as far as they can, and then the other team tackles them. And they got 4 downs to get 10 yards, and they got to get all the way down into the end zone. I don't want to get into a football lesson, but I'm just trying to frame it here, okay? So what happens is, as the team completes a pass or gets some running yardage, they start to build momentum. And you've seen it. You've seen these games where all of a sudden that momentum just goes right down the field. And then all of a sudden, when they get inside the 20, the red zone, everything slows down. It gets real hard to get into the end zone, right? So if you lose momentum in a football game, that all of a sudden, you know, you're going to turn over the ball. You're going to whether that be a fumble, an interception, turnover on downs, whatever it is, you're going to turn it over because you lost momentum. Sales is the same way. You've got to create that momentum in your sales process. So if you get on the phone with somebody and you have a great sales call and you have a great conversation with them and things are looking good, and then you let a whole week go by, it's like getting sacked. Okay. You lost all momentum. You've got to start that conversation and build it back up. So your goal is, you have a great conversation on Monday. You have a secondary follow-up conversation on Tuesday, whether that be an email or a phone call. And then you have another conversation or dialogue with them on Wednesday or Thursday. By Friday, you might be getting freight. Potentially, right? You might be doing quotes on loads and start talking about specific lanes. That can happen that quick. But if you sit back and wait for them to contact you, you lose all momentum, and you may never regain that momentum. You may never regain that momentum, because that was a point in time when that prospect felt a certain way and had maybe a certain pain point that was really top of mind. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, that's not an issue for them anymore. And you're just not, you're not clicking with them. So I can't stress the importance of momentum, and follow-up is that component to continue the momentum. And so my other suggestion to anybody from a sales perspective is, don't leave a phone call without trying to set a follow-up appointment or a follow-up action. You have to have a specific follow-up in mind. So if that person said, they want you to help them move it, but they haven't sent you the list, ask them to send you the list, and that after you get off the phone, and then you're going to follow up with them rates tomorrow. Will that work for you? Sure. Great. Okay. And when they don't send you the list, then you follow up and say, hey, not sure if I missed your email. I wanted to push this back up to the top and make sure that I was able to get those rates over to you. I know it's important. You got some loads coming up this next week, and I'm sure you're looking for rates. You just keep that follow-up, keep that momentum going. And again, a lot of people feel weird about doing the follow-up because they feel like they're being too pushy. I'm going to tell you, my suggestion and my lead has always been, you're going to lose less customers by being a little bit pushy and following up consistently than you will by not following up at all. So that would be my suggestion. I hope that helps. And listen, everybody that joined today, whether you're catching this on replay or you're catching this live, Thank you so much for being here. Again, if you're curious about becoming a freight broker or freight agent, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Been in business over a decade, trained over 10,000 brokers and agents, and we offer a 60-day, 100% money back guarantee. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, check out YouTube. I do weekly training, weekly videos every week. I take these lives, I'll compress them down into a shorter version, and we do those. We've got over 100 free freight broker training videos on the YouTube channel. You can check that out as well. Most importantly, I want to thank Tim for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Congrats on all your success. It's amazing. We definitely got to get together here soon. We're close enough. I'm super excited for you to hear where you're at, as things progress. And I wish you the absolute best of luck.
Thank you.
All right, guys, listen, we're going to wrap it up for today. Have an awesome day. Like, comment, share if you were inspired or you took anything from this episode. And I'll see you next Monday at noon, the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Thanks.